The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. In a small town nestled between those mountains, a 12-year-old girl stood outside a busy restaurant watching people through the large glass windows. Her clothes were dusty and worn. Her shoes had holes in them, and her stomach hadn't stopped growling for the past 2 days. She had been walking for 3 days now. 3 long days since she left the foster home where nobody really cared if she ate or not. 3 days of sleeping under bridges and in abandoned bus stops. 3 days of wondering if running away was a mistake, but knowing she couldn't go back to that place where she felt invisible. The girl clutched an old violin case close to her chest. It was the only thing she had left from her grandmother, the only person who had ever truly loved her. The case was scratched and faded, held together with duct tape at the corners, but to her it was more valuable than gold. Through the restaurant window, she could see families sitting together. A father was cutting food for his young son. A mother was laughing at something her daughter said. An elderly couple held hands across their table. The warm glow from inside made the restaurant look like a painting, like something from a world she didn't belong to anymore. Her stomach twisted with hunger. She hadn't eaten a proper meal in so long. Yesterday, a kind woman at a gas station had given her half a sandwich. The day before, she found some crackers in her backpack that she'd saved. But now there was nothing left. She was so hungry that her hands were shaking. The girl took a deep breath. She had an idea, a desperate one, but it was all she had. Her grandmother had taught her to play the violin when she was just 5 years old. For 7 years, music had been her escape, her comfort, her only friend during the lonely nights. Maybe, just maybe, she could trade her talent for a meal. She pushed open the heavy door of the restaurant. Immediately, warm air rushed over her, carrying the smell of fresh bread, roasted chicken, and herbs. Her mouth watered so much it almost hurt. The sound of conversations, clinking glasses, and soft background music filled her ears. It felt like stepping into a different universe. A tall man with graying hair and a clean white apron approached her quickly. His face wasn't exactly friendly, more like suspicious. He looked her up and down, taking in her dirty clothes and messy hair. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone making it clear he thought she didn't belong there. The girl's throat felt dry. She could feel other people starting to look at her now. A well-dressed couple at a nearby table whispered to each other. A group of businessmen in suits glanced over, their eyebrows raised. She wanted to run away, but her hunger kept her feet planted on the ground. "Sir," she said, her voice quieter than she wanted it to be. "I was wondering, may I play for supper?" The man blinked at her, confused. "What?" She held up the violin case slightly. "I play violin. I could perform for your guests, and maybe you could give me something to eat. I'm really good, I promise. My grandmother taught me." For a moment, the restaurant owner just stared at her. Then something changed in his expression. Not exactly kindness, but maybe curiosity. He crossed his arms and tilted his head. "You want to play that thing for food?" he asked, nodding at her beaten-up case. "Yes, sir. I won't disappoint you." Behind her, she heard someone laugh. It was a short, sharp sound that made her cheeks burn. Then another person giggled. The girl didn't turn around, but she could feel eyes on her back, could sense people looking at her like she was some kind of joke. The restaurant owner seemed to notice the reactions, too. He glanced around at his customers, then back at the girl. She could see him thinking, weighing his options. Would he throw her out? Would he call someone to take her away? "Please," she added quietly, looking up at him with eyes that had seen too much hardship for someone so young. "I just need one meal. That's all." Something in his face softened just a little. Maybe it was the desperation in her voice. Maybe he remembered being young and hungry once. Or maybe he was just curious about what would happen next. Whatever the reason, he let out a long sigh. "All right," he said, his voice still rough but not as harsh. "You can try. But listen here, if you're wasting everyone's time, you leave right away. No arguments, deal?" The girl nodded so fast she almost dropped her case. "Yes, sir." "Thank you, sir." He pointed to a small open space near the stone fireplace in the corner. "You can set up there. Make it quick." As she walked toward the corner, she heard the whispers growing louder. People weren't even trying to be quiet anymore. "Is he really letting her perform?" a woman's voice said. "Look at that case. I bet the violin inside is broken," a man replied with a chuckle. "This is going to be painful to listen to." Another voice added. A woman wearing expensive jewelry and a beautiful dress turned to her friend and said, loud enough for others to hear, Oh, this should be entertaining. That poor thing probably doesn't even know how to hold it properly. The businessmen at their table were smiling, shaking their heads like they were about to witness something amusing. One of them was already holding up his phone, probably ready to record what he thought would be a disaster. Even some of the younger waiters and kitchen staff had peeked out from the back to see what was happening. A few of them were grinning, elbowing each other, clearly expecting a show but not the kind the girl hoped to give. The girl felt her face getting hot. Her hands trembled as she knelt down and carefully opened the latches on her case. The laughter and whispers seemed to get louder, echoing in her head, making her doubt herself for just a moment. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe she should just leave and find food some other way. But then she saw it, her grandmother's violin, resting inside the worn velvet lining. The wood was scratched from years of use. One of the strings didn't quite match the others because she'd had to replace it with what she could find. The bow was old and the horsehair was thinning, but her grandmother's hands had once held this instrument. Her grandmother's love was somehow still trapped in this wood and these strings. The girl lifted the violin carefully, like it was made of glass. She found the small piece of rosin in the case pocket and ran it along the bow, her movements automatic from years of practice. Around her, the laughter continued. Someone made a comment about how pathetic she looked. Another person wondered out loud if they should just give her money to leave instead. But the girl blocked it all out. She stood up, positioned the violin under her chin, and adjusted her grip on the bow. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was it. This was her one chance. She closed her eyes, took one more deep breath, and thought of her grandmother's warm smile, her gentle voice saying, "Music isn't about the instrument, sweetheart. It's about what's in your heart." Then she began to play. The first note that came from her violin cut through the air like a knife through butter. It was a single, pure sound that seemed to freeze everything in the restaurant. The laughter stopped mid-breath. The whispers died on people's lips. Even the clinking of silverware against plates went silent. The girl kept her eyes closed and let her fingers move across the strings the way her grandmother had taught her. The melody that poured out was one she had played 1,000 times before, always alone, always in empty rooms or under bridges where no one could hear. But now in this warm restaurant filled with people who had just been laughing at her, the music felt different. It felt powerful. Her bow moved smoothly across the strings, creating notes that rose and fell like waves on an ocean. The sound was clean and clear, not what anyone expected from such an old, battered instrument. The violin seemed to come alive in her hands, singing a song that needed no words. The businessman who had been holding up his phone slowly lowered it. His mouth hung open slightly, his expensive meal completely forgotten. The woman in the beautiful dress and jewelry, who had made the loud comment just moments ago, sat perfectly still. Her friend beside her had stopped eating, her fork hovering in the air halfway to her mouth. At a table near the window, a young father who had been feeding his son turned his full attention to the girl. His wife reached across the table and squeezed his hand, her eyes already starting to glisten with unexpected tears. The elderly couple who had been holding hands stopped their quiet conversation and just listened, their faces soft with memory. The restaurant owner stood near the kitchen door, his arms still crossed, but his stern expression was beginning to crack. He had expected maybe some scratchy sounds, perhaps a simple children's tune played badly. He had given permission mostly because he felt a small pang of pity for the hungry child. But this was something else entirely. The girl's fingers moved faster now, dancing across the strings with the kind of skill that only comes from years of dedicated practice. This wasn't the playing of someone who had taken a few lessons. This was the playing of someone who had lived inside the music, who had used it to survive when nothing else could help. The melody she played was sad but also beautiful in its sadness. It told a story without any words. It spoke of lonely nights and empty stomachs. It whispered about missing someone you loved more than anything in the world. It cried out about feeling invisible, about being the kind of person others look through instead of at. But underneath all that sadness there was something else, something stronger. Hope, determination, the refusal to give up even when everything seemed impossible. A waiter who had come out from the kitchen to watch, the one who had been grinning and expecting a disaster, felt his smile fade away. He stood there with a tray of dirty dishes in his hands, completely forgetting what he was supposed to be doing. His eyes were fixed on the small girl in the corner. This child who looked like she hadn't had a proper bath in days but played like an angel. The melody shifted, moving from the sad parts into something that felt almost magical. The notes climbed higher, reaching for something beautiful just out of reach. The girl's whole body swayed slightly as she played, lost in the music, transported to some place where nothing could hurt her anymore. Her grandmother used to say that music was the language of the soul, and right now, her soul was speaking in a voice that everyone could understand. An older woman sitting alone at a corner table felt tears rolling down her cheeks. She didn't even try to wipe them away. The music had somehow reached inside her chest and touched something she thought she'd lost years ago. It reminded her of her own daughter, who she hadn't spoken to in 5 years because of a stupid argument she couldn't even remember the details of anymore. The music made her think about all the wasted time, all the missed chances to say sorry. A teenage boy who had been slouching in his chair, bored and scrolling on his phone while his parents ate dinner, slowly put his phone down on the table. He sat up straighter, actually paying attention to something happening in the real world for the first time all evening. Something about the music made his heart beat faster. It made him feel things he didn't have names for. The girl's bow moved across the strings with such confidence, such certainty. Each note was exactly where it needed to be, perfect in its timing and tone. The cheap mismatched strings didn't matter. The scratches on the wood didn't matter. What mattered was the heart behind the playing, and this girl had more heart than most people found in a lifetime. The song began to build toward something bigger. The notes came faster, layering on top of each other, creating harmonies that seemed impossible from a single instrument. The girl's fingers flew across the fingerboard, pressing and releasing, creating music that filled every corner of the restaurant. It bounced off the stone fireplace, floated through the air, wrapped around each person like a warm blanket on a cold night. People who had been in the middle of conversations couldn't remember what they were talking about. Couples who had been arguing earlier in the day felt their anger melting away. Children who normally couldn't sit still for more than 5 minutes were completely mesmerized, their eyes wide and their mouths forming perfect circles of wonder. The restaurant owner found himself thinking about his own childhood. Growing up poor in a neighborhood where dinner wasn't always guaranteed, he remembered what it felt like to be hungry, really hungry, the kind of hunger that gnaws at your stomach and makes your head hurt. He remembered the shame of it, the way it made you feel less than human. Looking at this girl now, seeing the skill in her hands and the pride in her posture despite her ragged appearance, he felt something shift inside his chest. The woman in the expensive jewelry touched her throat, feeling her own pulse racing. She thought about all the times she had judged people by their appearance, all the times she had looked at someone and decided they weren't worth her time based on their clothes or their car or their address. The music was showing her something she didn't want to see but needed to understand. Value wasn't always visible on the surface. The melody began to slow down now, becoming softer, more gentle. The girl's playing became tender, almost like a lullaby. It felt like the music was tucking everyone in, making them feel safe and cared for. Some people in the restaurant had closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. Others kept their eyes open but unseeing, staring at nothing, lost in whatever memories or feelings the music had unlocked. A cook who had stepped out from the kitchen wiped his hands on his apron, then discreetly wiped his eyes when he thought no one was looking. He had 3 daughters at home, and suddenly all he wanted was to go hug them and tell them he loved them. The music had made him realize how much time he spent at work, how many bedtimes he missed, how many school plays he couldn't attend. Life was short, the music seemed to say. Don't waste it. The girl played the final few notes of her song, letting each one linger in the air before moving to the next. Her eyes were still closed and there was a small, peaceful smile on her face. For these few minutes, she hadn't been a homeless child or a runaway, or someone people laughed at. She had been a musician, an artist, someone with something precious to offer the world. The last note hung in the air, pure and sweet, gradually fading into silence. The girl held her position for a moment longer, her bow still resting on the strings, her violin still tucked under her chin. Then slowly she opened her eyes and lowered the instrument. The restaurant remained completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. It was as if the whole world had stopped spinning just for a moment to acknowledge what had just happened. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. The girl stood there in the corner by the fireplace, her violin still in her hands, wondering if maybe she had done something wrong. Had they not liked it? Was the silence a bad thing? Her heart started to pound again, this time from worry instead of the rush of playing. Then, from somewhere in the back of the restaurant, someone started clapping. It was the cook who had wiped his eyes earlier. His claps were slow at first, deliberate, echoing through the quiet room. Then the elderly man by the window joined in. Then his wife. Then the teenage boy who had put down his phone. Suddenly, like a dam breaking, the entire restaurant exploded into applause. People weren't just clapping politely like they might at a school concert. They were clapping like they meant it, like something inside them had been touched and they needed to let it out. Some people stood up from their chairs, their palms coming together so hard it had to hurt. Others were clapping while tears streamed down their faces, not even bothering to wipe them away. The businessman in the expensive suit shot to his feet, clapping so enthusiastically that his napkin fell from his lap onto the floor. He didn't even notice. The woman in the jewelry was standing too, her hands pressed together in front of her chest, shaking her head in disbelief. Her friend beside her was crying openly now, mascara starting to run down her cheeks, but she was smiling through the tears. The young father lifted his little son up so the boy could see better, and the child started clapping too, even though he probably didn't fully understand why everyone was so excited. He just knew something special had happened. The mother was crying and laughing at the same time, clapping so hard her hands were turning red. The applause grew louder and louder until it felt like the walls of the restaurant were shaking. People were cheering now, not just clapping. Someone whistled. Someone else shouted, "Bravo!" The waiters and kitchen staff who had been watching from the doorway were clapping just as hard as the customers, all pretense of needing to work completely forgotten. The girl stood there, completely overwhelmed. She had never experienced anything like this in her entire life. When she played for her grandmother, it had been in their small living room, just the two of them, and her grandmother would smile and clap gently and say, "Beautiful, sweetheart." But this was like standing in the middle of a thunderstorm made of appreciation and joy. Her eyes started to water. She tried to blink the tears back, but they came anyway, rolling down her dirty cheeks and dripping off her chin. But these weren't sad tears. These were tears of relief, of validation, of finally being seen as something more than just a problem or a burden or an invisible child that nobody wanted. The restaurant owner was clapping too, and there was something wet shining in his eyes that he quickly wiped away with the back of his hand. He had run this restaurant for 20 years, had hosted countless musicians and entertainers, but he had never seen anything like this. Never felt anything like this. As the applause continued, something else started to happen. The businessman reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. He didn't count the money, just grabbed several bills and started walking toward the girl. The woman in the jewelry was fumbling with the clasp of her gold bracelet, the one that probably cost more than most people made in a month. The elderly man was reaching for his wallet too. The young father was pulling out cash from his pocket. One by one, people started moving toward the corner where the girl stood. They came with money in their hands, with kind words on their lips, with expressions that had completely transformed from what they'd looked like just 10 minutes ago. These were the same people who had laughed at her, who had whispered cruel comments, who had expected to be entertained by her failure. Now they couldn't get close to her fast enough. The businessman reached her first. Up close, she could see that his eyes were red, like he'd been trying not to cry but hadn't quite succeeded. He pressed the folded bills into her small hand and then pulled out a business card from his other pocket. "Listen to me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "My sister teaches music at the conservatory downtown. She's one of the best teachers in the state. You call this number tomorrow, you tell her David sent you, and she'll give you lessons. Free of charge. You're too talented to not have proper training." Before the girl could even respond, the woman with the jewelry was there. She had managed to unclasp her bracelet, and now she was pressing it into the girl's other hand, closing the girl's fingers around the gold. "Sell this if you need to," the woman said, and her voice was shaking. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I said before. I was cruel and stupid, and you just taught me a lesson I needed to learn. You're extraordinary, sweetheart. Truly extraordinary." The elderly man came next, adding his own money to the growing pile in the girl's hands. "You just reminded me of something I'd forgotten," he said softly. "My wife and we used to love music. We haven't been to a concert in years. Thank you for bringing that beauty back into our lives. More people kept coming. The young father gave her money and patted her shoulder gently. The teenage boy emptied his pockets of everything he had, which wasn't much, but he gave it all. The woman who had been sitting alone, the one who had thought about her estranged daughter, pressed money into the girl's hand and whispered, "You just helped me realize what's really important. Thank you." Even some of the waiters came over during their break, adding their own tips to the collection. One of them, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 20, took off her own scarf and wrapped it around the girl's shoulders because she noticed the child shivering. The girl didn't know what to do or say. Her hands were full of money and the gold bracelet, and people kept giving her more. She tried to say thank you, but her voice kept breaking. She felt like she was in a dream, like maybe she had fallen, asleep under a bridge somewhere, and this was all her imagination showing her what she wished would happen. But it was real. The warmth of the scarf around her shoulders was real. The weight of the money in her hands was real. The kindness in everyone's eyes was real. The restaurant owner had been standing back, watching all of this happen. Now he stepped forward, and the crowd of people parted to let him through. He stood in front of the girl and looked down at her for a long moment. She couldn't read his expression, couldn't tell what he was thinking. Then he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He knelt down on one knee so he was at her eye level. His knees cracked a little as he did it, and under different circumstances it might have been funny, but nobody was laughing now. "What's your name, young lady?" he asked gently. The girl swallowed hard. "Lily," she whispered. It was the first time anyone had asked her name in days. "Lily," he repeated. And somehow the way he said it made it sound important, like it mattered. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth. Are you here alone? Do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight?" The girl's bottom lip trembled. She wanted to lie, wanted to say she was fine, that her parents were waiting for her somewhere, but something about the genuine concern in his eyes made her tell the truth. She shook her head no. The restaurant owner took a deep breath and glanced back at a woman who had emerged from the kitchen. The woman was wiping her hands on her apron, and when their eyes met, she nodded slightly, like they were having a whole conversation without words. He turned back to Lily. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, and his voice was firm but kind. "First, you're going to sit down and eat the biggest meal this kitchen can make. And I mean the biggest. Everything you want, as much as you want. Second, we're going to figure out your situation properly. You're 12 years old. You shouldn't be alone out here." Lily's eyes went wide with fear. "Please don't call anyone," she begged. "Please don't send me back. I can't go back there." The restaurant owner held up his hand. "I'm not sending you anywhere tonight," he said. "Tonight, you're safe. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. But right now, let's get some food in you. Deal?" Lily nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. The woman from the kitchen, who Lily would later learn was the owner's wife, came over and put a gentle arm around her shoulders. "Come on, sweetheart," she said softly. "Let's get you fed. Do you like chicken? We make the best roasted chicken in 3 counties. As they led Lily toward a table, the other customers started returning to their own seats. But something had changed in the restaurant. People were talking to each other differently now, looking at each other differently. Strangers were introducing themselves to other strangers. The businessman was showing his family photos to the woman with the jewelry. The elderly couple was chatting with the young family about their grandson who wanted to learn violin. The music had done something to everyone in that room. It had cracked them open and reminded them of what really mattered. They sat Lily at a table near the fireplace, the same corner where she had just performed. The warmth from the fire felt amazing on her cold skin. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt truly warm. The restaurant owner's wife pulled out a chair for her and smiled in a way that reminded Lily so much of her grandmother that her chest ached. "Now then," the woman said, sitting down across from her. "I'm going to bring you some water first, and then we'll start with some bread and soup while the kitchen makes you a proper meal. Your stomach probably can't handle too much rich food right away if you haven't been eating regularly. We'll take it slow, okay?" Lily nodded, grateful that the woman seemed to understand without Lily having to explain. Within minutes, a glass of cold water appeared in front of her, along with a basket of warm bread that smelled like heaven and a bowl of vegetable soup that was still steaming. Lily's hands shook as she reached for the water. She tried to drink slowly like her grandmother had taught her, but the water tasted so good that she couldn't help gulping it down. "Easy, sweetheart," the woman said gently. "There's plenty more. No need to rush." Lily set down the empty glass and picked up a piece of bread. It was soft on the inside and slightly crusty on the outside, still warm from the oven. The first bite made her want to cry again. She hadn't realized how much she missed simple things like fresh bread. She ate slowly, trying to have manners even though everything inside her screamed to devour the entire basket. While she ate, people kept coming over to the table, not to bother her or make her uncomfortable, but just to say something kind before they left. The businessman stopped by with his wife and 2 kids. "I meant what I said about my sister," he told Lily. "She's going to call here tomorrow to set up a time to meet you. And here," he pulled out another card, "this is my number too. If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call." My wife and I were serious about helping. His wife leaned down and squeezed Lily's shoulder. "You have a gift," she said, "a real gift. The world needs to hear you play." Their kids, 2 boys who looked about 8 and 10, waved at her shyly. The younger one said, "That was really cool. You're like a superhero but with a violin." After they left, the woman with the jewelry approached. She had fixed her makeup, but her eyes were still puffy from crying. She sat down in the chair across from Lily and just looked at her for a moment. "I need to tell you something," she said finally. "I said something really mean about you before you played. I judged you based on how you looked, and I'm ashamed of that. My mother raised me better, but somewhere along the way, I forgot how to see people properly. You reminded me tonight that beauty and talent and worth have nothing to do with clothes or money or any of that superficial nonsense." She reached across the table and took Lily's hand. "I don't know what you're running from, and you don't have to tell me. But I want you to know that you're valuable. You matter. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you don't." Lily couldn't speak past the lump in her throat, so she just nodded. The woman smiled, patted her hand one more time, and left. The elderly couple came next. They didn't say much, but the old man slipped a note into Lily's hand along with more money. "That's our phone number," he said. "Our grandkids live far away. If you ever need someone to talk to or if you need a safe place, you call us. We have a big house with too many empty rooms." His wife added, "And I used to sew. If you need clothes or anything like that, I'd love to help. It would give me something useful to do." Even the teenage boy stopped by before leaving with his parents. He looked awkward, like he wasn't used to talking to strangers, but he pushed through his discomfort. "Hey," he said, shifting from foot to foot. "I just wanted to say that was amazing. I've been kind of a jerk lately to my parents and everyone. But hearing you play, it made me think about stuff differently. So yeah, thanks, I guess." His mother, standing behind him, had tears in her eyes. She mouthed thank you to Lily over her son's head. One by one, the customers finished their meals and left, but not before making sure Lily knew they cared. By the time the last customer walked out the door, Lily had a pile of business cards, phone numbers scrawled on napkins, and more money than she had ever seen in her life. But more than that, she had something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt seen. She felt valued. She felt like maybe the world wasn't such a cold and cruel place after all. The restaurant owner locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. His wife brought out more food, this time a plate of roasted chicken with vegetables and mashed potatoes. The smell alone was almost overwhelming. "Eat as much as you can," she said, sitting down again, "and then we need to talk about what happens next." Lily ate slowly, savoring every bite. The chicken was tender and seasoned perfectly. The potatoes were creamy and buttery. The vegetables were fresh and crisp. It was, without question, the best meal she had ever eaten. Or maybe it just tasted better because of how hungry she had been. Either way, she felt like she was being filled up with more than just food. She was being filled up with hope. When she finally couldn't eat another bite, the restaurant owner pulled up a chair and sat down with his wife. They both looked at Lily with expressions that were kind but also serious. "Okay, Lily," he said. Here's the situation. You're a minor, and you're clearly running from something. Now, I don't know what your situation is at home, and I'm not going to pressure you to tell me if you're not ready, but I do know that we can't just let you wander around by yourself. It's not safe and it's not right. Lily felt panic rising in her chest. Please don't call the police. Please don't send me back to the foster home. They don't care about me there. Nobody does. I'm just a number to them, just another kid taking up space. The owner's wife reached across and took Lily's hand. Sweetheart, we're not trying to make things worse for you. We're trying to make them better, but we need to do this the right way. The owner nodded. Here's what I'm thinking. My wife and we've been talking, and we have a room upstairs above the restaurant. It's just storage right now, but it used to be a small apartment. We could clean it up, make it livable. You could stay there while we figure out a more permanent solution. We'd need to contact social services, his wife added quickly when she saw the fear in Lily's eyes, but not to send you back to a bad situation. To make sure you're placed somewhere good, somewhere safe. Or if that's not possible, we could look into becoming foster parents ourselves. We've actually thought about it before, but never took the steps. Maybe this is the push we needed. Lily stared at them, unable to believe what she was hearing. You would do that for me? You don't even know me. The owner smiled, and it completely transformed his face. I know you're a brave kid who's been through hard times. I know you have incredible talent, and you're willing to work for what you need. I know you could have stolen food from the kitchen when no one was looking, but instead you offered to earn it honestly. That tells me a lot about your character. His wife added, and I know that hearing you play tonight reminded me why we opened this restaurant in the first place. We wanted to create a place where people felt welcome and cared for, where community mattered. Having you here, it feels right. It feels like this is what we're supposed to do. Lily felt tears running down her face again. She seemed to be crying every 5 minutes now, but she didn't care anymore. I don't understand why you're being so nice to me, she whispered. The owner leaned back in his chair and looked at his wife, then back at Lily. 25 years ago, I was a kid not much older than you. I ran away from a bad situation too. A restaurant owner in another town gave me a job washing dishes and let me sleep in the back room. He saved my life. He gave me a chance when nobody else would. Eventually, I saved enough money to go to culinary school, and years later I opened this place. He gestured around at the restaurant. Everything I have, everything I am, started because one person decided to help a scared kid who needed it. I've been waiting for my chance to pay that forward. Maybe you're that chance, his wife squeezed Lily's hand. What do you say, sweetheart? Will you let us help you? Will you trust us? Lily looked at their faces, at the genuine kindness there. She thought about the alternative, about going back to sleeping under bridges and wondering where her next meal would come from. She thought about the possibility of playing violin again, of maybe even getting real lessons. She thought about having a safe place to sleep and people who actually cared whether she was okay. She took a deep breath and nodded. Yes, she said, her voice small but certain. Yes, please. I'd like that very much. The owner's wife smiled so wide it crinkled the corners of her eyes. Then it settled. Tonight you'll sleep in our guest room at home. Tomorrow we'll start making calls and cleaning up that apartment. And tomorrow evening, you'll play here again if you want to. I have a feeling word is going to spread about what happened tonight. The owner stood up and stretched. But right now I think it's time we all got some rest. It's been quite an evening. As they helped Lily gather her things, including all the money and cards people had given her, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt like she belonged somewhere, like she had a place in the world. 3 months had passed since that first night at the restaurant, and Lily could barely recognize her own life anymore. She stood in front of the mirror in her small apartment above the restaurant, straightening the collar of her new dress. It was simple but clean, a deep blue color that her grandmother would have loved. Her hair was brushed and tied back neatly. Her shoes were new and actually fit properly. She looked like a completely different person from the hungry, desperate girl who had walked into that restaurant with nothing but a violin and a prayer. The apartment had been transformed from a dusty storage room into a cozy little home. The restaurant owners and their staff had spent 2 full weekends cleaning, painting, and furnishing it. The elderly couple who had given Lily their phone number had donated a bed and a dresser. The businessman's wife had brought curtains and decorations. The woman with the jewelry had hired someone to fix the plumbing and install a small kitchenette. It felt like the entire community had come together to build her a place where she could feel safe. But the biggest change wasn't the apartment or the clothes, or even having enough food to eat every day. The biggest change was inside Lily herself. She smiled more now. She slept through the night without nightmares. She had started to believe that maybe, just maybe, good things could actually last. There was a knock on her door. "Lily, you ready?" It was the restaurant owner calling up the stairs. People are starting to arrive. Lily took one more look in the mirror, picked up her violin case, and headed downstairs. The restaurant looked different tonight. They had moved some tables to create a small performance area near the fireplace. Chairs were arranged in rows facing the corner where she had first played. There were flowers and vases on every table, and the lights were dimmed just enough to create a warm, intimate atmosphere. And there were people. So many people. The restaurant was completely packed, with folks standing along the walls because every seat was taken. Lily recognized many faces from that first night, but there were new people too. Word had spread through the town about the girl with the violin who played like an angel. People had been coming every Friday evening to hear her, and each week the crowd grew bigger. The businessman was there with his entire family, sitting in the front row. His sister, the music teacher from the conservatory, sat beside them. She had been giving Lily lessons twice a week, free of charge, and kept telling everyone that Lily was the most naturally talented student she had ever taught. The elderly couple was there too, sitting hand in hand like always. The woman who used to wear expensive jewelry now dressed more simply, but her smile was brighter than any gold. She had told Lily last week that she had started volunteering at a homeless shelter, that Lily had inspired her to do more with her privilege than just spend it on herself. Even the teenage boy was there with his parents. Lily had learned his name was Chris, and he had started taking guitar lessons. He told her that watching her pursue her passion had made him want to find his own. His relationship with his parents had gotten better too. His mother had pulled Lily aside once and thanked her through tears, saying that the night Lily played had somehow brought her son back to her. The restaurant owner stepped into the performance area and raised his hands for quiet. The conversations died down and everyone turned their attention to him. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he said, his voice carrying easily through the room. 3 months ago, a young girl walked into this restaurant and asked if she could play for her supper. She was hungry, tired, and had every reason to give up on the world. But she had something that kept her going. She had her music, and she had courage, and she had hope. He paused, his eyes finding Lily standing near the kitchen door. What we didn't know that night was that she wasn't just going to change her own life. She was going to change all of ours too. She reminded us what really matters. She showed us that worth isn't measured in dollars or status or appearances. She taught us to look deeper, to care more, to be better. People around the room were nodding. Some were already tearing up, and she hadn't even played yet. "Tonight is special," the owner continued, "because tonight I have some good news to share. After months of working with social services, dealing with paperwork, and going through all the proper channels, I'm happy to announce that my wife and I have been approved as Lily's foster parents. And if everything continues to go well, we'll be starting the adoption process next month." The room erupted into applause and cheers. Lily felt her eyes filling with tears for what felt like the millionth time since that first night. The restaurant owner's wife appeared beside her and pulled her into a tight hug. "Welcome to the family, sweetheart," she whispered into Lily's hair. "Welcome home." When the applause finally died down, Lily walked to the performance area with her violin. Her hands weren't shaking this time. She wasn't scared or desperate or wondering if people would laugh at her. She knew these people now. They were her community, her supporters, her friends. Some of them were becoming her family. She positioned her violin under her chin and looked out at all the faces watching her. 3 months ago, she had played because she was hungry and had no other choice. Tonight, she was playing because she wanted to. Because music was who she was, and these people had given her a place where she could be herself without fear. "I want to play something different tonight," she said, her voice stronger than it had ever been. "This is a piece my grandmother composed herself. She never got to share it with anyone but me. She called it Tomorrow's Promise because she said no matter how dark today gets, tomorrow always brings new possibilities." She began to play, and the melody that filled the restaurant was unlike anything she had performed before. It started soft and uncertain, like the first light of dawn, then grew stronger and more confident. It had moments of sadness, acknowledging the pain that was part of life, but those sad notes always resolved into something hopeful, something beautiful. As she played, Lily thought about everything that had happened. She thought about the foster home where she had felt invisible, and how she had found the courage to leave. She thought about those scary days of being alone, hungry and frightened. She thought about walking into this restaurant not knowing if anyone would even listen to her. But most of all, she thought about how one moment of bravery had changed everything. How asking, "May I play for supper?" had been the scariest and best decision of her life. How being willing to be vulnerable, to share her gift even when she was terrified of rejection, had opened doors she never knew existed. The music swelled to its peak. All the instruments of the orchestra somehow present in her single violin. It spoke of transformation, of second chances, of communities that lift people up instead of tearing them down. It sang about the power of kindness and how one act of compassion could ripple outward and touch dozens of lives. As she moved into the final section of the piece, Lily opened her eyes and looked around the room. She saw the businessman with his arm around his daughter, probably thinking about those free music lessons he was now sponsoring for 3 other kids in town who couldn't afford them. She saw the woman who had judged her that first night, who now volunteered 20 hours a week helping people less fortunate. She saw Chris the teenager holding his guitar case, excited about his own musical journey. She saw the elderly couple, who had reconnected with their estranged daughter after that night and now had their grandchildren visiting every weekend. She saw the restaurant owner and his wife, standing together near the kitchen, holding hands and smiling at her with so much love that it made her heart ache in the best possible way. They weren't just giving her a home, they were giving her parents a future, a chance to become whoever she wanted to be. The final note rang out pure and clear, holding in the air like a promise before slowly fading into silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the applause started again, but this time Lily didn't feel overwhelmed by it. She felt proud. She felt grateful. She felt found. After her performance, as people came up to talk to her and share how the music had made them feel, Lily realized something important. That first night, she had asked if she could play for her supper. She had been asking for food for survival, for one basic need to be met. But what she had received was so much more than a meal. She had received a family. She had received a community. She had received a future filled with possibility. She had received proof that the world still had good people in it, that kindness still existed, that hope was not a foolish thing to hold on to. The elderly woman approached and hugged her gently. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you," she whispered. Lily smiled through her tears. "I think she knew," she said. "I think she knew that if I just kept playing, if I just kept hoping, eventually I'd find my way home." And she had. Not to a place, but to people. Not to a building, but to belonging. She had found her way to a life where she didn't have to ask if she could play for supper anymore. She could play because she wanted to, because she loved it. Because her music had the power to heal not just herself, but everyone who heard it. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the restaurant was quiet, Lily sat in her apartment with her violin on her lap. She looked at the little space that was now hers, at the pictures on the wall, at the books on the shelf, at all the signs that someone lived here, that someone belonged here. She thought about that desperate, hungry girl who had walked through the restaurant door 3 months ago. She thought about how close she had come to giving up, to believing that nobody cared, that she didn't matter. And she thought about how wrong that belief had been. How one question asked with trembling courage had changed absolutely everything. "May I play for supper?" she had asked, and the world had answered, "You may play for so much more than that. You may play for joy. You may play for love. You may play for a life worth living." And so she did.